Motherhood, but not quite as we imagine. Thought-provoking, refreshing, straightforward, sometimes taboo, often seemingly ordinary, but always honest. Welcome to School for Mothers, opening conversations we all need to have, exploring ways in which you can be fulfilled as a woman, once a mother. Now here is your host, mother of 10, Danusia Melina Durban.
Hello and welcome back to episode 3 of the School for Mothers podcast. I'm Danusia Melina Durban, your host, and the title for this week's podcast is Disrupt. And our guest is Jess Butcher MBE. Jess is an entrepreneur. That's a little bit of an understatement. You see, she's something of a rather large entrepreneur in the world. Not only that, she's a mentor, an NED, and angel investor. Do you know, I really hate those acronyms. They just pee me off. They really do. So an NED is non-executive director. I'll try not to be too wanky in the future. Going back to Jess, she's co-founder of Butcher, one of Britain's best-funded technology scale-ups. And not only that, Butcher is one of the world's leading computer vision and augmented reality technology platforms. For those of you interested in those kind of things, it's a unicorn company. It doesn't make unicorns, just so you know. I suppose something to say about recording this episode with Jess was that it was a complete pleasure. I mean, every episode is a thrill in itself because I get to meet and chat with very, very different mothers from around the world who have wonderful stories, incredible perspectives, very different takes on life. That is honestly a privilege for me. And I learn personally so much, and I'm very thankful that I can share that with you, the listeners. But what really stands out for me is that Jess is not only whip smart, she's also super down to earth, which is pretty rare for an entrepreneur with so many accolades and achievements and awards beside her name and in her experience. She is a multiple TED Talk person, TED Talker, and she really operates at an elite level in the world and contributes to our thought leadership in a very significant way. What I really found refreshing about Jess is that in a world that kind of has perfection very much as part of something we strive for, it really was fabulous to discuss the merits of being scrappy. So I like that. And I know that at my most productive, believe it or not, is when I'm in my pajamas with my music on with some kick-ass kind of tracks, and I'm ticking things off my me sheets. Which reminds me, this episode is supported by me sheets. That's a powerful tool that I designed to get things done, and most importantly, for me to be central in my own life. Because quite honestly, I found losing myself, particularly once I had the triplets, was very much of a risk in my own life. And if you'd like your own free copy, please go to schoolformothers.com/me sheets. Go grab your own copy and start seeing if me sheets will help you not only organize your life and get shit done, but actually make sure that you're in the center of your own life. So before we dive into the episode with Jess, I want to invite all my podcast listeners to a private School for Mothers Facebook group. It started a little while ago. It's quite new. And so far, more than 750 women, mothers, all mothers from around the world. I think we're up to about 32 countries so far, maybe more because it goes up every day, are in that group. Find us on Facebook by simply searching for the School for Mothers group. That's a School for Mothers group. Anyway, I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's go ahead and jump into my conversation with Jess. So, Jess, do you see yourself as a disruptor?
I probably only recently associated myself with that as a specific term, and I love it. So yes, I do now. I guess how I would have articulated it prior to the word becoming a bit more fashionable is that I just love working with businesses that are kind of breaking the mold of their respective industries, of finding more efficient, more fun, more interesting ways of doing things than the established norm. And that has been pretty much the only underlying theme that I can find within all the various different career moves that I had throughout my 20s and early 30s before I took the leap into entrepreneurship, is one of disruption, which is that's how I would define that, which is, working with businesses that are challenging established industries and trying to do things differently and trying to convince consumers of why this is a much better, more efficient or more experiential or more fun way of doing something. So yes, I think I'm all about disruptive behaviors and how we can encourage those in consumers and in business audiences and the like.
So as you talk, I was thinking, I secretly would love to know what your biggest disruptive fail was.
I've had a lot of failed roles. I've got a scrappy, the ugliest CV I think you've ever seen. Right? Throughout my 20s, I moved between companies every 18 months to 2 years. And I was really ashamed and embarrassed about that as a CV for a long time, because I thought it said, she can't be managed, or she's not very disciplined, or she loses attention quickly. Many of which were probably true, actually. And I definitely made moves, for example, reactively away from, jobs that I weren't enjoying rather than necessarily proactively to the perfect opportunity. And those were probably mistakes as I was making them, and I was making them for the wrong reasons. But I'm quite pragmatic about how I look back at the experiences, because I genuinely believe, and it's an overused comment really, that, failures are what make you, and therefore, you shouldn't ever regret failures. But I don't, because I think all the negative experiences that I have had professionally have always been the most formulative when it comes to taking learnings and realizing what I am good at, what I do enjoy, the areas that I need to improve myself or get more knowledge on. So whereas they were painful experiences to go through, either being managed out or making a decision to leave, a team that I wasn't gelling with, they were brilliant experiences always, with hindsight, that I learned a huge amount about, because I think the strongest lessons you get in life are normally the negative ones. They're rarely the positive ones. So I tend to look at them in quite a sort of pragmatic way, rather than worrying that was a failure or a mistake. It was just a great learning experience that's made me the person that I am. So I do believe that very strongly.
I really love the fact that you've actually really turned this around now from a position of shame and embarrassment to celebration of who you are and what you can offer, which is...
Well, I paid a lot of money to a career coach to do that, so...
Oh, that's fabulous. Oh, I'm glad you said that. So, and how long did you work with this career coach, and how long did that process kind of take to go from that embarrassment through to, recognition?
Yeah, it was probably at one of the 6 months that was probably my lowest professional period, which was about 2.5 years ago, when I was making the decision as to how I was going to balance family life and deciding. I effectively, through that process, made the decision to lean out for a period of the very intensive work life that I had and my sort of day-to-day involvement, the front seat of my business. I kind of made a decision through that process that actually, that wasn't making me happy, and I needed to evaluate what did make me happy and what I was enjoying. And it was an incredibly cathartic process to go through. It's quite a vulnerable position to put yourself in, to really have all these very, very searingly honest conversations with somebody you don't know that well. So finding that person and getting the right person to have those conversations with it was critical. But it was very, very cathartic, and I'm so pleased I did that.
Brilliant. I really, leaning out is something so important. Sheryl Sandberg's work is hugely important, isn't it? But the fact is, so many of us need to lean out.
I think your life ebbs and flows, and I think it's an important sort of not debunking of her book, but even she, I think, given her life circumstances, has sort of questioned. Yes. The black and white narrative that kind of came out of that first book as something that, it isn't necessarily for everybody, and that you can't be constantly leaning in, because there are so many other things going on in your life at any particular time. That means there are times and periods within which you can lean in and out. I'm leaning back in very actively and proactively right now, in the full knowledge that I'm doing that. And that's going to come at the expense of some of the balance that I've enjoyed over the last 2 years. But I'm so ready for it. I'm hungry for it. And I think that self-awareness about what you're doing and why you're doing it and when you're doing it is what's so important.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Leaning in, leaning out. As you say, that kind of flow of what's needed at when, and your energy. That's the thing. Tell me what you're hungry for right now. What is it exactly?
I'm hungry to get my hands dirty again. I've been doing a number of different things with a lot of different businesses, and I've really been getting a huge amount of intellectual stimulation from that. But the more I've done it, the more I'm thinking, oh God, I just want to own something and build it up and feel that full sense of control and responsibility for it. So I'm potentially, watch this space, but I'm potentially getting a bit more involved with one of my startups that I had been advising than I had perhaps anticipated I would, much to my husband's displeasure.
Oh, really? So talk to me about how you do navigate kind of relationship, being a mother. I mean, remind me how many children you have and how old they are.
Only 3. They are 1, 2, and 4. So it's a very intensive stage of our life. We've got 3 under 4. They're all preschool. My eldest is just starting reception in the autumn.
Yeah.
And it's, if I'm honest, it's probably the most lovely period of life that I've had. I'm absolutely loving it. I'm so enjoying being a mum. It's exhausting. It's draining. It's frustrating. Yesterday was a particular low point with a broken washing machine, lots of squabbling and, wanting to just run out of the house and not come back. But on balance, I would say it's the most hilarious, gorgeous, sort of heart-swelling time of life where there's just humor and amusement and wonder, and you start to see the world through the eyes of your young children. And we're in this lovely stage that I'm very conscious of, that I can almost kiss better any problems they have right now, and I'm acutely aware that won't always be the case, and in fact very soon there will be more sort of psychological challenges and issues and friends and cultural things that we'll need dealing with. But right now they're all of an age where bumps and pain and squabbles can be broken up fairly easily with a cuddle and pulling someone onto your lap. So it's a lovely, lovely time of life. Very much enjoying it.
It really is. How does your being a mother to these 3 little ones, born very quickly in succession, aren't they? So
yeah, we had a business plan for the family. We decided we'd have 3 before I was 40, and we achieved it. We didn't really think through the psychological and lifestyle ramifications of that business plan, but there it is.
That's hilarious, Jess. That's really funny. And you were lucky enough to be able to actually operationally enact that.
Operationally, yes, exactly.
Implement the strategy.
Yeah.
That's really good. But how does having 3 under 4 actually nurture you as a disruptor? What are you learning in that process? Because, of those squabbles and the mess, the chaos, the juicy, loving, kisses.
Sure. Well, I think one of the learnings that I've had progressively with each child, actually, and I'd say that my first taught me one of the most important business lessons when it came to entrepreneurialism and startup culture, which is if you want to scale your business, you kind of really have to understand how to delegate and empower and let go and bring people in to do things. And, like many entrepreneurs, I think I fell into that trap of needing to quality control everything that was leaving the business, everything that was going to clients, to sit in every meeting, to, really, I guess, over micromanage a lot of the people that we brought into the business in those early days. And my first maternity leave, which was very short and much more American style, only 3 months or so, really taught me that was hampering the scalability of my part of the business that I was overseeing. That by not empowering people, I was putting a brake on our growth by having to be involved in everything. And it took a rather astute business partner of mine to say during that time, Jess, stop. you cannot be doing this. You're actually in labor. You have been for 4 days, which is another story. You need to not, respond. You've just contradicted something that we've discussed in a meeting that you weren't there in. Let them do it. And after that 3 months, when I came back, they were taking decisions that I wouldn't necessarily have taken, and that I was a little bit annoyed by, or wanted to question. And then I stopped and kind of looked at the results of what was happening, and I thought, this is actually working. Who knew? Who knew they were, that these different decisions from mine would actually be as effective and successful as they were? And that enabled me to elevate myself into more of a strategic, bigger meetings, bigger thinking, longer term vision, whilst they, were able to then maintain that day-to-day growth. And I'd say that each successive child has enabled me to do that even more so. There's been a, directly proportionate way in which, as I've had more children, I've come to get much, much happier with delegation and, not being much more macro and a lot less micro. And the other thing that it has taught me in the sort of scrappy day-to-day juggle of, all the different life admin that you have to do with a young family, all the different coordination that's required, the business days, and the negotiation of my husband with, whose day is more important when the nanny's ill to cancel your day, and, who's getting back on time for this deadline versus the other person. We've learned that being scrappy is fine. And I think being scrappy is a hallmark of a disruptive business person, because you cannot wait until things are perfect. You need to air your ideas before you've necessarily fully formed them. You need to challenge things in the moment. You need to think less about what people think, because you just got to get on with it. There's 3 people at home waiting. If you agonize over that particular meeting and spin it out for another 90 minutes, it's, you're not going to get home. So you kind of just think, well, okay, here's my idea. What do you think? Let's just go with it, and let's give it a shot. And that, again, is the other, I think, important characteristic of successful fast growth companies. One of the mantras I've heard and I've adopted is, better sooner than perfect. Yeah. And I think that, parents of young children who put themselves in these fairly frenetic, high risk environments, and my husband's now doing this as well by having just joined a startup as one of the first team members, you have to get comfortable with the messy.
Yes.
And my family life has made me get even more comfortable with it. I live in it, so I'm perfectly happy in it professionally. And, I don't always know where my week's going to go when I start it. But as long as I'm, busy and focused in kind of the priorities, which I'm a much more gut sense businesswoman around. I don't need to write myself very detailed lists and achievements and, goals and plans. That's not my personality type. I tend to feel my way through my priorities in a more of a gut feel sense. Mm-hmm. And that works for me. And it certainly works in my marriage, because my husband's exactly the opposite. He's a planner, whereas I'm not. And I think my gut response to things balances out his need to be more methodical with the planning, and vice versa. So it's actually a really great partnership in terms of how we look at both our home lives and our professional lives.
Yeah. I adore what you're saying, because you're absolutely busting so many myths about successful business women in terms of having, everything sorted, everything in terms of documents, lists, as you've just said, totally in control and on top of it. And what I really love is the fact that you're saying that it's messy, scrappy, it's unknown, you're using your gut. And for me, I'm methodical, and yet actually following my gut dominates more than anything. And so I think for me, being a mother of a large family, I always see it like running a business. We're a huge team, and, the logistics of having so many people who can throw up anything at any time. I don't literally mean vomit, but that is also a possibility, of course, because it is with lots of kids. But kind of, it's that jostling and that being with many, many ever-changing, fast-changing elements that actually equips you to be able to be disruptive, but also to successfully run business. It's a joy to hear you saying this, because I think sometimes when I'm a speaker at a conference or on a panel, everything seems to be spoken about, or often it's spoken about as if it's neatly packaged, and that it could and should be neatly packaged in the business world. And that's not my experience at all. So thank you for throwing that up and really helping others hear that.
I do think I should clarify. I do think there's a time and a place for neat packages as well, and I do think that as a business scales, it needs to act, in a neater and more professional way in order to give itself the blueprint around which it can scale. But I guess what I've learned about myself is that I'm a very good startup to scale up business builder. I'm not, and my skills are what get businesses off the ground, but I'm not sure that I'm necessarily a great C-suite individual, once the business needs that structure in place. And I think there's a strength to knowing your strengths and weaknesses. And
yes.
I'm the first to admit, as you can hear, that I don't think I'm a great swim lane player. You're just looking after marketing. Go, here's your remit, here's your budget. Build your team and go. I that bores me. I want a little bit of everything, and I like the scrappy lifestyle. So that has dictated the career choices that I make. But there's absolutely a place for, I guess, the grown-ups, as I refer to them. And, we've learned that within our business and have brought in some really sort of heavy hitter, very good structured thinkers to take the business to the next level. And I really recognize that as a skill. It's just not a great personality trait of mine. I could probably do with honing it a bit better.
Well, I think the word that you've just used is exactly the one that I was thinking of, which is of structure. So structure and processes and all of those very tightened up, boxed elements have got to be there, haven't they? But as you say, knowing your strengths and knowing where you really shine and what you can bring to the table is so important. And actually having you in the C-suite in a particular role would stifle the skills and talent that you can bring. So that's what those 18 months to 2 year parts of your CV are all about, that you're not built for the longevity of, the day-to-day execution. It's not that you're here for. So it's the startup to scale up.
Yeah, and there's I've been doing a lot of reading around the sort of new way in which the recruitment or the personnel world is evolving in terms of people doing, I think Reid Hoffman referred to it in his book, The Alliance, as people doing a tour of duty with any particular role. And a typical tour of duty is 2 to 3 years in duration, beyond which they either need a new role, either within the same company, or they will look elsewhere. Having this sort of mixed CV now is no longer a negative. It's often a strength, because you get a lot of knowledge about a lot of different things and a lot of styles of doing business. I think particularly in startup and entrepreneurial environments, I think a corporate track, is a less common career track actually now, to stay within a company for a long period of time. But I'm also reading quite a lot about, there's a few different phrases I've seen thrown around. One is linky brains. The other, which I particularly like, which is slightly tongue-in-cheek, is a multi-potentialite. There's a TED talk about it. And it's about people like me who are good generalists, but don't really have depth of knowledge in particular areas. And there's a real value to that, actually, in being a generalist and having these bits of knowledge, because these people often sit at the junction of innovation and disruption. They know enough to bring together sort of specialist stakeholders and to sort of challenge accepted thinking within established industries, but then connect them, for example, a big corporate with a really interesting niche tech player doing something in a different industry, which they can see the application for across the new industry. And this sort of linky brain movement, which I'm hearing more and more about, I so identify with, because it's totally me. Throw me into any industry and I'm like, I've never even seen that sector before, but wow, I love that model and those people are awesome. How can I help them, or how can I apply the little bits of knowledge that I have about different industries to their model and help kickstart it? And I do think it's a lovely definition of people like me in terms of how we drive innovation and disruption, by connecting the dots between specialist knowledge and expertise.
Absolutely. I love the phrase linky brains and multi-potentialite. I think aren't they super? I mean, they are a bit funny.
I think they're deliberately silly, but I like them and that appeals to me.
Yeah, exactly. And I was talking to a clinical psychologist the other day, and he in a very simple way, he told me something that it was so obvious that I hadn't really grasped. And he said, so at its simplest form, intelligence is pulling together links between disparate things. It's the ability to pull together those, different links. And of course, that's what, I mean, like you, take me into any industry and I can apply all sorts of, in fact, I'll backtrack on that. I have a habit of going into newsagents or anywhere that sells any magazines and looking at really different magazines like Angling Times or some bodybuilding thing or a car magazine. And I've done this for years and I've really enjoyed it because I'll pick it up and in any different magazine, I'm looking at thinking, oh my gosh, what is the link between like bodybuilding and X? Like, how can I use that model that's sitting in there of how they do that in another context? And I think that's exactly what we because I'm really quite a generalist. So I understand what you're talking about, but it's not asking your brain to go too deep into any one thing, because actually your brain isn't built that way. So I think it's really, really good. And so the combination of intentionally living and understanding your scrappy kind of way of living. I don't think scrappy is the word, but I love the fact that you use it. It's not even a word I ever use, but scrappy's so good.
Well, it's got that aspect of tenacity around it as well, which is me, that sort of terrier-esque, yes. Right, I'm just going to make this happen. I don't know how yet, but I am. I'm going to do it. And that's kind of where I am. So I like it.
You're reminding me of a Jack Russell. Sorry to interrupt you. Kind of get it in your teeth and kind of go with it. And yeah, it's something I really love about you and kind of noticing how incredibly tenacious and determined you are, but mixed with this wonderful edge of intuition and gut sense. So not just using that kind of logical side, but actually really, really coming from the feminine, what is seen as the feminine, of course. I'm not suggesting that men don't have this.
I know. I've wrestled a bit with this myself, because I think what you're talking about, is emotional intelligence. Yes. And that's one of the hardest things to hire for. Because, and it's so important in so many aspects of business, is the ability to read a situation, a person that you're dealing with, and to adjust your approach according to how you've read that person. And it's such an intangible. Obviously, if somebody's been very successful in a sales role, then you assume that potentially they have high emotional intelligence, that they can do that. So there is something to be read into a CV around that. But emotional intelligence is also applicable to the cultural fit of that individual to your organization. And I like to think I have high emotional intelligence, and that's what serves me well in terms of, being able to talk at the top table and trade at the lowest levels, and to adjust, what is appropriate in different situations. But it is very, very hard to define. And this whole question as to whether women have more of it than men is almost a can I don't particularly wish to open. But, yeah. My gut feel is that we do. So I will put myself out there and at least say that. But it is very, very hard to define. And of course, there are many men that have it in spades, and there are many women that don't have it. So it's tough to make broad generalizations. But it is such an important part of keeping a cohesive culture in a business.
It is. I'm wondering, amongst your 3 children, what do you see in the differing levels of emotional intelligence? I know they're very tiny, but...
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I think it's just starting to evolve now. For example, my son is much more introverted than my daughter, and neither my husband or I can understand where this introverted personality type has come from, coming out of the two of us. Whereas my daughter is very much ta-da. That should kind of be her catchphrase. And she just walks into a room and spins and says, "Look at me." And he sort of starts to hide in the background a little bit more. So we're trying to work out ways in which we can, develop these traits that are ultimately, make him, more as likable a child as we know him to be, but is sometimes quite hard to come across with other people. And I've actually read quite a bit about this in a parenting capacity. I read a lovely book which talked about how you should encourage your children to be as likable as you can, because then the whole world is their teacher. They have an unfair advantage then on all other children, because if your child is likable, if they're polite, if adults like being around them, then they're drawn to them and talk to them and ask them questions and, really engage. Whereas if your child is more introverted, then they get less of that voluntary conversation and discourse with adults that ultimately helps them to learn and develop. And of course, you can't make your child an extrovert. I totally understand that. But you can teach them skills that mean that adults are drawn to them and do want to engage with them. And we're sort of looking at what we're saying and how we're trying to develop, that confidence in my oldest as he grows. Although I don't think it's a challenge. He's a lovely child, but he just is, moving into the shadows the more my daughter starts to assert herself, which she's doing with an increasing alacrity, unfortunately.
Isn't it? It's funny about the dynamic of different children. So he goes into the shadows because of her tendency to be center stage. And I wonder what his relationships will be like, when he has the opportunity to be more center stage. So it sounds like it's in relation to her, although...
Yeah, I think so, because he definitely doesn't have that amongst his own peers.
Yeah.
Once he is comfortable within his group, he's the life and soul of that group. And in fact, he then veers to the other extreme and gets naughty and starts showing off and, all the things that 4-year-olds can do. But it takes him longer to warm up than it does her. But, I think that's fine. And, it's more than anything, my husband and I are just intrigued by it, because he's suddenly hitting an age where he has that much more self-awareness that a young child doesn't have. There's no guile there at all. They're not playing a role, whereas we're starting to observe this because he's our oldest and he's only 4. It's the first time that we're experiencing him potentially changing himself in certain situations, and because he thinks that's what will please people, and acting in different ways around different people, that it's fascinating. I think parenting is just such a fascinating journey in terms of understanding yourself, but and how you teach them and how you approach certain subject matters, so that you don't guide their viewpoint in the wrong direction too early, because you quickly said something that was a societal assumption 10 years ago may not be now, and constantly double checking yourself and looking at the world through their eyes is such a incredibly rewarding experience.
It is. And one way I like to look at this is to say that, and to remind myself actually, that these children, and I've got children of a variety of ages, we're all learning to be human. It's watching that whole learning to be human and what that means to each one, and which one of children, are willing to morph to other ways, please people, those who are absolutely steadfast in their, this is how it is, this is who I am. And I've seen that in some of my children. And it's such a privilege and honor to go through, because actually really, really teaches us so much about ourselves, ultimately. And I see huge learning that can be transferred back into the business world. And I don't really hear very much conversation about that. It's almost like the business world it's in itself, just that. And then there's this world of parenting, raising children, and that's separate. Whereas I see it so much more mixed, that you can translate so many of the lessons from one context into the other, and to great benefit. But I don't hear that really talked about very much, because we don't have very much regard for the world of parenting, because it's, I don't think society values it very highly.
No, not at all. Power seems to be all about seats on boards and management, and to be valued in terms of your income.
Yes.
And that to me is a bit of a worrying byproduct of a lot of this, even the gender pay gap dispute, which I think is highlighting a lot of really important areas that do need to be addressed. But it also boils power down to money and seniority.
Whereas, status, it's...
Exactly. And arguably, one of the most important aspects of power is choice. And the choices you make to potentially lean in or out, or, to do different things at different times with your life. And what about, as you say, the family power or children's rights in all of this to, their right to have more time with either one of their parents, not just their mother, but their potentially, time with their fathers during, more societally accepted paternity leave structures or part-time working arrangements, which, simply men don't take up in the same way that women do. And one of the issues that's constantly being neglected as part of this debate, and I'm given particular cause to think about it because I'm looking at all of my incredibly high-achieving professional friends who have out-earned many of their male peers and outperformed them throughout their 20s and early 30s, now suddenly going, do you know what? I don't want to make partner. Why do I want that life? I want a 4-day week. I want flexibility, and I don't want the stress and the politics and the angst that comes from fighting at that level. And I kind of think, oh, well, this is interesting. What's power then? Are they powerful in the fact that they're proactively making that decision? Or, they're all responsible by these choices for contributing to the gender pay gap, myself included. But yet we're told that we almost, the argument is saying we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be making those choices because we undermine, women's ratios at the top and their earning potential. And yet I look at these women and I just think they are power personified. They are making those choices for their families, for themselves, in light of, what makes them and their children and their family lives happy. And yet the debate just seems incredibly myopic around the need to get more women on the top without any of these conversations being brought in. And I think that does this conversation a disservice, actually, to boil it down to money and board seats and power, because I personally believe that power is in choice. Now, this is a conversation obviously really only relevant to the senior professional, high-achieving women, and not to women of all social classes and in other professions and those that, can't afford that choice, frankly.
Yes.
But so much of the gender pay gap debate is at that level. It's talking about women on boards. It's not talking about why, part-time women or cleaners or people working within the service sector don't have the same rights or, how they stand it with regards to their male counterparts in those jobs. It seems to be all about, senior ranking BBC officials and the gender pay gap there, and women in banks and women in technology and women in, it is on that professional level. And yet it's not talking about the choices that professional women are making to, I think, very powerfully create more balance in their lives. So there's a number of different issues going on there, and we could have a whole podcast about that. So I probably, maybe, I just want to throw those out there as a way of, I think the phrase is sort of increasing the size of the Overton window, because that window, the window of debate around these topics is incredibly narrow. And I think that means that there's not a lot of space to have some of those broader discussions around power and choice, and then put the emphasis where it should be, I believe, on, the opportunities or lack thereof for working class women.
Absolutely. We're still working on such a deeply embedded patriarchal model of what work is. And the debates, as you rightly say, need to embrace a whole host of elements that aren't really talked about. And also, I think that's one of the reasons why we've got such a division between conversation about boards, women on boards, and then women leaving corporate worlds and the context to then become entrepreneurs. And so we've got this kind of mumpreneur or entrepreneur parallel track. And conversation between those doesn't really happen. I don't see it much. You become, typical kind of, and again, I'm talking about professional women, build a career, have children, realize it's not going to work, whatever it is, and then leave, become an entrepreneur, which of course doesn't suit everybody.
That's really interesting. It'd be great to see any data, or see if somebody can look at the data of how one might be driving the other, because I suspect that you're right. I suspect there probably is a really nice correlation between those lifestyle decisions that, that isn't very visible and isn't being discussed.
Yeah.
It'd be great to, who's listening to this podcast right now? Can you help us with some market research and data that demonstrates our theory?
I suspect that will be you and I that will go find somebody to do that, because actually it really does need to be discussed. And, the whole issues around, the corporate context that really still assume that it's the woman that will be the primary caregiver. And even though, yes, I understand that men can go part-time, or they can, there are whole rafts of things that have come into place, but men don't take it up. So something isn't working to have men do that. And, we need a groundbreaking shift, I think, around what it means to have children and what it means to be caregiving. It's not just children, actually. It's, many of my friends are both looking after children and elderly parents. They're sandwiched in between, and it's all to do with care, and they're highly talented women. So, there's much to be done on this. And we're making some headway. I mean, we are, but it takes disruptors to, like yourself, massive disruptor, to raise this and to be a voice for, not just a voice, but an actually active participant in disrupting what is happening in the world, but also in business. So it's an absolute pleasure for us to know that you're out there doing what you do
in a scrappy way,
in a scrappy, messy, creative, go-getter, tenacious way. Yeah. Thank God for your terrier, the terrier in you. So yeah, brilliant. Okay. So last thing I'd love to ask you, what do you see is possible, like, for the future of mothers? What would you like to, fast forward 20 years? I would love to hear what you hope will be possible for mothers then.
Whoa, really big question.
Mm.
Well, I guess it's what I fear. I don't want to turn a positive, hopeful question into a negative answer. But my fear is a lot around what we've just been discussing, the sort of devaluation of motherhood in a lot of this current climate, that I want there to be no judgment and no pressure for women that want to invest their time in motherhood, for that not to limit their career options and opportunities as and when they lean in and out of a professional life in balance with a family life, but that we really take pleasure and enjoyment in the time and opportunities that we have to spend with our families, and there's no longer that guilt that comes from thinking, well, I'm a professional high flyer, I should still be doing that, I should be on a particular track, versus I've now chosen to, the stigma of having chosen to spend time at home with family. I think we're losing track of the important things in life, and the fact that the most I think stark thing that I keep reading is this, nobody on their deathbed wishes that they spent more time, at work. Mm-hmm. They always regret not having spent enough time with those that they love. And, a lot of these professional debates and gender debates now are forgetting, I think, what makes for a happy life, which is people. Yes. It's love, it's depth of experience, it's in time, it's making experiences and memories with the people that you care about. Family, friends, work colleagues, absolutely. Those experiences are just as valid and can be just as thrilling and become part of the tapestry of the memories that you will value when you look back at all your cumulative experiences. But I fear, with rise of technology and with a lot of the different identity politics debates and offence culture, that we're losing sight of all the opportunities that we have in this world that make us happy. And we're losing perspective about a lot of those things. And I want to see that perspective return, because it's, as I say, it's the little things in life that make us happy. Mm-hmm. And we're all getting so stressed about the little things and the perception of the little things, of what other people think about us, that that's quite disempowering. And I want, mothers to feel proud in all the decisions that they make and to have the opportunities as and when they want to take them. But that sounds, right now, the way I've just said it sounds like an unrealistic dream. But I think there are ways that we can broaden the debate to bring all of these things back in, and to create more mental health around that balance, which I think is in danger of getting worse in some of the current debate.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, what an incredible answer. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's the little things in life, and regaining or even gaining a fresh perspective on truly what matters in life. And it is those memories and love that we have with, a connection with those people that truly matter to us. So it isn't necessarily about where the debates currently are. So I'll join you. I'll join you over there in those debates and bringing those debates back into focus for sure. You can count on me. So, wow.
I think the debates happen a lot one-on-one, but I don't think they happen publicly. And I think that's a shame. You can sit with a friend over a glass of wine or a coffee, and you can have that conversation very frankly. And yet there's a nervousness in public debate around, speaking too vocally about some of the bigger themes that might be misconstrued as, internalized misogyny or whatever else it might be. And I think that's sad, because I think these are the public debates, particularly where the mental health implications of a lot of this are concerned. These are big things. It's about creating balance and having perspective. And I fear that it's perspective that's being lost in a lot of the current debate. But hopefully we can start to bring it back.
Yes, let's bring these back into the public domain, and hopefully with more compassion, because I think there's been a reduction of compassion about raising, and a lot of nervousness, as you say, about raising some of these topics for fear of being burned, actually, in whether online, whether, in social media, or whether in person. So I completely agree with you. I think in small pockets, in small, one-to-one dialogues, absolutely, these discussions have been had. So I guess it takes, again, disruptive, brave, courageous people to bring this into the public domain. So Jess, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wonderful energy in the world and for all you're doing. I'm deeply grateful that you were willing to come on this episode and be a major disruptor in the world generally. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. No, I've really enjoyed it.
Well, there you have it. My favourite moments from our conversation include when Jess talks about failures and how without them success just wouldn't have followed. I really adore the way she talks about all the failed roles that she had. Isn't that just brilliant? Especially hearing from a woman, that just has really, really kind of excelled in so many ways. I love it. I'm so often on stage with women accomplished women who simply won't tell it like it is. And I adore this. So thank you so much, Jess. The other thing that's really fabulous about Jess is that she tells the truth about her ugly CV. Isn't that great? I mean, and the benefit and strength and gift that being a super generalist is for her. And, it really makes sense. So that was just brilliant. I think one of the things that really helps in our conversation is that as mothers, and I think maybe strike a line through that, and as women, a perfection is something we seem to expect of ourselves all the time. But I don't think that's necessarily a positive thing. So I really hope that you have some takeaways from today's episode to inspire you in your own scrappy journey. I certainly have for my own scrappiness. I don't do scrappy that well. Now, I've spent a lot of my life attempting to be all together, and as much as I am all together, vulnerability and embracing, humanity and mistakes, and when we trip over and we get up, actually that's one of the most important things. At least I find so. Let me tell you about my guest next week. It's Lacey Haynes, and the title is Gaze. I defy you to have listened in to quite the kind of conversation that you'll hear. I really think this is quite an unusual one. Lacey and I talk all things pussy. Yep, you heard me right. And as well as that, as if that's not enough, we discuss how her confidence in her feminine power grew exponentially throughout a pregnancy without medical intervention and a free birth. That basically means Lacey did not have any scans or any intervention at all during her pregnancy. And in fact, she gave birth without any medical staff. This is radical stuff and is fascinating to listen to. Lacey is really, really an interesting woman. And she is a yoga teacher, she is a spiritual guide, and a movement practitioner. And it's going to be a great one. Listen in. So before we go, a quick announcement. At School for Mothers, we really, really want to provide a platform for and represent the lived experiences and beliefs of different women from all over the world. Yep, sure, I'm recording this from a UK base, but that doesn't mean to say that this is UK-centric. So after all, I really, really understand that there is no one size that fits for all kind of mothers, and indeed for feminism, for that matter. So if you want to share your wisdom and story with ambitious mothers around the world, and what I really mean by that is it's not about being ambitious mothers, it's much more mothers who have ambitions for themselves and for the world. So there's a slight difference there. Maybe I'm being picky. But if you'd like to be featured on the podcast, why don't you email us at podcast@schoolformothers.com. That's podcast@schoolformothers.com. We love getting your letters. We love getting your feedback, and we really want to hear from you. Please be in touch. So that's all for this week. Thanks for joining us again. See you again next week. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you for tuning in to the School for Mothers podcast. To continue the conversation and keep your dose of inspiration up, head over to schoolformothers.com/podcast, where you'll find bonus content from Danusia and a guest on habits, recommendations, books, best apps, time-saving secrets, life hacks, health, sleep, and anything in between. That's schoolformothers.com/podcast.